The alarm klaxons screamed through the corridors of Kepler-7, research station like the dying wails of a wounded beast. Dr. Sarah Santos pressed her palm against the bioscanner and rushed into the emergency briefing room, her botanical samples forgotten in the chaos. Around the crescent-shaped table, representatives from 7 different species sat in various states of agitation, much like a United Nations meeting if the UN included crystalline beings and 6-armed warriors. The salvage team found something, announced Commander Thex, his 4 arms gesturing frantically. The Gorvak's usually steel-blue skin had taken on a sickly green hue. In the wreckage of the colony ship Meridian, a holographic display flickered to life, showing grainy footage from the rescue pod. Dr. Santos leaned forward, expecting to see survivors or perhaps valuable technology. Instead, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a creature no bigger than a house cat, but with midnight black fur, razor-sharp claws, and the distinctive cranial ridges of a Vorthik. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Zetha, the Zentari, xenobiologist. Her normally composed demeanor cracked like ice under pressure. "Vorthik don't leave cubs behind. They'd rather die than abandon their young." The ethereal representative, Loxandra, began flickering between colors so rapidly it looked like a living aurora having a seizure. "My people cannot. We cannot even view the recordings without triggering cascade panic responses. The very presence of Vorthik genetics in our sensor range is causing mass psychological distress." Lieutenant Korvex, the station's Gorvak security chief, stood abruptly. His chitinous armor rattled as stress-induced molten began. "We need to jettison that thing into space. Now, before it grows large enough to—" "It's dying," interrupted Dr. Santos quietly. The room fell silent. "Look at the readings. Malnourished, dehydrated, injured. It's just a baby." The station's AI, Aria, materialized as a shimmering hologram. "Dr. Santos is correct. The juvenile Vorthik has approximately 72 hours before critical system failure. However, my calculations indicate a 0.003% probability of successful intervention. No known species can approach a Vorthik without triggering evolutionary terror responses." "Then we watch it die," said Commander Thex grimly. "It's the only logical no." Dr. Santos stood, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years studying life in all its forms. "We're scientists. We don't abandon helpless creatures because they're inconvenient." Across the station, 12-year-old Emma Santos was doing her homework in the observation deck, watching the star's wheels slowly past. She had no idea that her mother was fighting for the life of the most dangerous predator in the galaxy, or that in a few hours she would make a choice that would change everything. The meeting continued for another hour, with each species representative explaining why their people couldn't help. Evolution, they said, had hardwired them to flee from Vorthik. Millions of years of predator-prey relationships couldn't be overridden by logic or compassion. The cub would die alone, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. But evolution hadn't accounted for humans. Asterisk. Emma Santos had always been different from the other children on Kepler-7. While the young Centauri hid behind their parents' robes, and ethereal children dimmed their lights in fear. Emma wandered the station's corridors with the fearless curiosity of a species that had evolved under different stars. She found the containment lab by following the sound of her mother's voice through the ventilation system, a trick she'd learned from the Gorvak maintenance crew. What she saw made her heart break. The Vorthik cub huddled in the corner of a sterile containment cell, its obsidian fur matted with dried blood and debris. It was smaller than she had expected, no larger than the earth cats she'd seen in her mother's botanical databases. Its breathing was labored, and one of its hind legs was clearly injured. "Mom's right," Emma whispered to herself. "It's just a baby." Through the observation window, she could see the assembled scientists maintaining their distance. Even with multiple layers of reinforced transperisteel between them and the cub, several species representatives had already evacuated the area. The Ethereal's delegate flickered so violently that she looked like a broken hologram, while the Zentari researcher's empathic abilities were causing him visible distress. The scent alone is triggering fight or flight responses, Dr. Zethai was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. My people literally cannot override the evolutionary imperative to flee. It's like asking someone to stop breathing. Emma pressed her face against the cool metal of the ventilation grate, watching the cub's sides rise and fall with each labored breath. She thought about the stray cat she'd once found in the hydroponics bay, how it had hissed and scratched at first, but gradually learned to trust her gentle hands and soothing voice. What about sedation? Suggested Dr. Santos. If we could keep it unconscious. Vorthic metabolism makes most sedatives toxic, replied Arya. The few compounds that might work would likely kill a juvenile in its current weakened state. Emma made her decision. While the adults debated impossible solutions, she crawled through the maintenance shaft to the containment level. The security systems were designed to keep dangerous things in, not to keep curious humans out. Her small size and intimate knowledge of the station's layout made her nearly invisible to the automated sensors. She emerged from a service panel directly into the containment area, just meters from the cell. The cub's head lifted at her approach, and Emma felt her breath catch. Its eyes were the color of molten gold, ancient and intelligent, filled with pain and confusion. Hello, little one, she whispered, moving slowly to the cell's control panel. I'm Emma. I'm going to help you. The cub tilted its head, watching her with those incredible eyes. It didn't flee, didn't attack, didn't show any of the aggressive behaviors that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. It simply watched, as if trying to understand this strange, fearless creature that dared to approach. Emma's fingers hesitated over the cell controls. She knew she was probably making a terrible mistake. But looking at the injured cub, she also knew she couldn't walk away. She pressed the release button, and the containment field shimmered and died. The containment field dissolved with a whisper of static, leaving nothing between Emma and the galaxy's most feared predator except empty air and Emma's own courage. The cub's nostrils flared as it caught her scent, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, neither moved. Then the cub took a tentative step forward, favoring its injured leg. Emma knelt slowly, making herself smaller and less threatening. Her mother had taught her that most creatures, no matter how dangerous, responded to body language more than words. You're hurt, Emma said softly, extending her hand palm up. I can help, but you have to trust me. The cub's golden eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that would have sent any other species fleeing in terror. But Emma saw something different. In that gaze, not the cold calculation of a predator, but the desperate hope of a lost child. Slowly, carefully, the cub approached. Its movements were liquid grace despite the injury, every step a demonstration of the deadly elegance that had made its species apex hunters. When it was close enough to touch, it stopped and lowered its head, pressing its muzzle against Emma's outstretched palm. The contact sent a shiver through both of them. Emma felt the cub's rapid heartbeat through its fur, the fever heat of its skin, the tremor of exhaustion in its small frame. The cub, for its part, encountered something it had never experienced, a being that showed no fear, no aggression, only gentle concern. There, Emma whispered, stroking the soft fur between the cub's ears. See? I'm not scary, and neither are you. The cub's eyes drifted closed, and for the first time since its rescue, it relaxed completely. Emma carefully examined the injured leg, finding a deep gash that had begun to fester. The cub flinched, but didn't pull away as she probed gently around the wound. We need to clean this, she murmured, rising slowly to search the containment area for medical supplies. The cub watched her every movement, its head turning to track her like a flower following the sun. Emma found a basic first aid kit in the emergency supplies. As she returned to the cub, she began to speak in the soothing voice she'd learned from, watching her mother with injured plants. "You know, you're not what I expected. Everyone's so afraid of you, but you're just lonely, aren't you?" The cub's rumbling response was barely audible, somewhere between a purr and a growl. Emma chose to interpret it as agreement. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, talking constantly to distract both herself and the cub from the sting of the medicine. "My mom says fear makes people see monsters where there are just misunderstood creatures. She studies plants that everyone thought were dangerous until she proved they were actually beneficial." The cub's breathing evened out as Emma worked, its trust in her growing with each gentle touch. When she finished bandaging the wound, it nuzzled against her hand with something that could only be described as gratitude. "You're welcome, Emma," said, settling beside the cub. It immediately curled up against her side, its warmth seeping through her clothes. "You must be hungry. Let me see what I can find." As she reached for the emergency rations, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The harsh red light of emergency protocols bathed the containment area in crimson, and Emma realized that her absence had been discovered. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, accompanied by the distinctive whir of weapons charging. The cub's head snapped up, its body tensing as it sensed the approaching threat. "Emma," her mother's voice, tight with fear and desperation. "Emma, where are you?" Emma looked down at the cub, now trembling against her side. She could surrender. Now, let the adults take over. Let them debate and calculate while the cub died alone. Or she could trust in the connection she'd forged with this magnificent, misunderstood creature. "It's okay," she whispered, wrapping her arms around the cub. "I won't let them hurt you." The containment area doors burst open, revealing her mother, Commander Vex, and a full security team. Weapons snapped to targeting positions, and the cub's golden eyes reflected the laser sights like twin suns. But Emma didn't move. She sat calmly in the middle of the storm, one hand stroking the cub's fur, projecting a peace that seemed to radiate outward like ripples in a pond. "Stand down," Dr. Santos said quietly, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Lower your weapons." His security team hesitated, but Commander Vex's 4 arms gestured for compliance. Slowly, the weapons lowered, though they remained ready. Emma looked up at her mother, the cub still pressed against her side, and smiled. "Mom, I'd like you to meet my friend." 3 weeks had passed since Emma's first contact with the Vorthek cub, and Kepler-7 had become a very different place. The sterile containment cell had been converted into a more comfortable habitat, complete with soft bedding, climbing structures, and a small pool for the cub to bathe in. Emma had named him Kai, which meant little warrior in an old Earth language. Doctor Santos watched through the observation window as her daughter fed Kai from a bottle, the cub's powerful jaws gentle as silk around the feeding nipple. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Emma had become more confident, more mature, taking responsibility for another life with the dedication of someone twice her age. Kai had grown from a dying, frightened creature into a healthy, playful companion who seemed to understand that Emma was not just his caretaker, but his family. "The neural scans are fascinating," Dr. Zethai said, his earlier terror replaced by scientific curiosity. The Zentari had been able to approach the observation area once he realized that Kai responded to Emma's emotional state. The cub's brain patterns show unprecedented neural plasticity. It's literally rewiring itself to recognize humans as pack family rather than prey. Commander Vex's molting had finally stopped, though he still maintained a respectful distance from the habitat. "My people have legends about Vorthic pack bonds," he said thoughtfully. "They say that once a Vorthic accepts you as family, it will die before allowing harm to come to you. We thought they were just stories." Emma looked up from her feeding duties, Kai's golden eyes tracking her movement. "He's not dangerous," she said for the 100th time. "He just needed someone to show him kindness." The proof of Emma's words came in how Kai behaved around the station's other inhabitants. While he remained wary of most aliens, he showed no aggression. When the ethereal delegate Luxandra had finally worked up the courage to approach the habitat, Kai had simply watched her with curious interest, his body language calm and non-threatening. "It's unprecedented," Arya announced, her holographic form flickering with excitement. "This is the first recorded instance of interspecies bonding between a Vorthic and any other sentient being. The implications for xenobiology are staggering." But Emma didn't care about the scientific implications. She cared about the way Kai purred when she scratched behind his ears, how he brought her small gifts of shiny objects he found in his habitat, and how he seemed to understand her moods better than most adults. The challenges came as Kai grew. Now the size of a medium dog, his natural predatory instincts were beginning to emerge. He stalked the maintenance robots with playful intensity, his movements becoming more fluid and dangerous with each passing day. His claws, once small and harmless, were now capable of scoring deep grooves in metal. "The question isn't whether. He'll become dangerous," Dr. Santos said during one of their daily evaluations. "The question is whether Emma's influence will be enough to control those instincts." The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Dr. Korvash, a visiting researcher from the hegemony, had ignored all warnings about approaching the habitat. Whether from curiosity or arrogance, he had entered the containment area while Emma was. At her studies, the security feeds showed what happened next. Kai, now nearly full-grown, had positioned himself between the intruder and Emma's belongings. His posture was unmistakably threatening, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth designed for tearing through armor. Dr. Korvash, a member of a species that had been prey to Vorthic for millions of years, had frozen in primal terror. The situation escalated when Korvash, in his panic, activated a neural disruptor, a device designed to pacify dangerous creatures. The energy pulse struck Kai directly, sending him into convulsions of pain and rage. In that moment, millions of years of predatory evolution took over. Emma arrived just as Kai lunged at the cowering researcher. Time seemed to slow as she watched her friend, her family, transform into the monster everyone expected him to be. But instead of screaming or running, Emma stepped between them. "Kai, stop!" Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I'm here. You're safe." The great predator stopped mid-leap, his claws inches from the researcher's throat. His golden eyes found Emma's face, and the rage drained away like water through sand. He landed softly beside her, pressing against her legs with a whimper of confusion and pain. Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the tremor of barely contained power in his muscles. "It's okay," she whispered. "You protected me." "Good boy." The watching scientists realized they had witnessed something unprecedented. The bond between Emma and Kai wasn't just emotional. It was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be predator and prey, monster and innocent, alien and family. As Emma led Kai back to his habitat, Dr. Santos felt a mixture of pride and terror. Her daughter had achieved something miraculous, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The attack came at 0347 hours, when most of the station's inhabitants were deep in their respective sleep cycles. The Shadowkin raiders emerged from hyperspace like wolves from the darkness, their stealth ships invisible until they were already docking with Kepler-7's outer hull. Emma jolted awake to the sound of emergency klaxons and the acrid smell of burning metal. Through her quarter's viewport, she could see the raiders' dark ships attached to the station like parasites, their cutting beams carving through the hull with surgical precision. "Emma!" Her mother's voice crackled through the comm system. "Stay in your quarters. Lock the door and don't come out until—" The transmission cut off as the power grid fluctuated. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and Emma could hear the distinctive whine of plasma weapons echoing through the corridors. The Shadowkin were a mercenary species, renowned for their ability to infiltrate and overwhelm research stations. They dealt in stolen technology and biological specimens, selling their prizes to the highest bidder in the galaxy's black markets. A research station like Kepler-7, with its diverse alien population and cutting-edge xenobiology labs, would be a treasure trove for them. Emma's first thought was of Kai. The habitat was on the lower level, far from her quarters, and the raiders would inevitably discover the galaxy's most valuable predator. She could imagine their leader's eyes lighting up at the prospect of capturing alive Vorthik. Despite her mother's instructions, Emma slipped out of her quarters and made her way through the station's maintenance tunnels. The sounds of battle grew louder as she descended the crackle of energy weapons, the screams of terrified civilians, and the harsh barking of Shadowkin tactical commands. She found the habitat in chaos. The observation windows had been blown out, and 3 Shadowkin soldiers stood guard while their leader, a tall figure in advanced combat armor, studied Kai with predatory interest. Kai himself was magnificent in his rage. Now fully grown, he stood nearly as tall as Emma at the shoulder, his midnight fur rippling with barely contained power. His golden eyes blazed with a fury that would have reduced any other species to gibbering terror. But he was trapped behind emergency containment barriers, his claws scoring futile grooves in the reinforced walls. "Incredible," the Shadowkin leader was saying. "A live Vorthik specimen. The hegemony will pay millions for this creature." "Glee, neural conditioning is remarkable," added one of his subordinates, studying a datapad. "It's been domesticated by the human child. Think of the implications. An army of trained Vorthik soldiers." Emma's blood ran cold. They weren't just going to sell Kai, they were going to use him as a weapon, turn his capacity for love into a tool for war. She activated her mother's override codes, the ones she'd memorized from watching Dr. Santos work. The containment barriers flickered and died, and Kai's head snapped toward her hiding place. Their eyes met across the chaos, and Emma saw something that made her heart break confusion, fear, and a desperate need to understand why his world had suddenly become violent. The Shadowkin raised their weapons as Kai emerged from his habitat, but Emma stepped into the open before they could fire. "Don't hurt him," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "He's not a monster. He's my friend." The leader's helmeted head turned toward her, and she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical force. "The human child. Perfect. We'll take you both. You can train others of his kind." Kai moved to place himself between Emma and the raiders, his body language shifting into a stance she'd never seen before. This wasn't the playful creature who brought her shiny gifts, or the gentle companion who slept beside her bed. This was a Vorthik in full predatory mode, a perfect, killing machine shaped by millions of years of evolution. "Easy, Kai," Emma whispered, placing her hand on his flank. "They're not going to hurt us." But even as she spoke, she knew it was a lie. The Shadowkin's intentions were written in their aggressive postures, their raised weapons, their casual discussion of selling her and Kai like property. The leader gestured to his subordinates. "Take them both. Use neural stunners if they resist." Time seemed to slow as Emma watched the weapons swing toward them. She thought of her mother, fighting somewhere in the station's upper levels. She thought of Commander Thek's and Dr. Zethai, of Luxandra, and all the others who had learned to see past their fear. She thought of the choice that had brought her and Kai together, the decision to reach out despite the danger. Now she faced another choice, one that would define not just her future, but the future of two species that had been enemies for millennia. "Kai," she said softly, her hand still resting on his flank, "protect the station. Protect our family." The great predator's golden eyes met hers one last time, and she saw understanding there. Not the mindless obedience of a trained animal, but the conscious choice of a friend who knew what she was asking of him. Kai exploded into motion with a grace that defied physics. He moved like liquid shadow, like death-given form, like the apex predator he had been born to be. But his targets weren't random. They were specific, chosen, the threats to his pack and his family. The battle was over in seconds. The Shadowkin, for all their armor and weapons, were simply not equipped to face a Vorthik in full predatory mode. But Emma saw something in Kai's movements that the raiders couldn't restrain. He could have killed them all, but instead he disabled them, using precisely the right amount of force to eliminate the threat without unnecessary cruelty. When the last raider fell, Kai returned to Emma's side, his breathing heavy but controlled. She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. "Good boy," she whispered. "You chose wisely." Above them, the sounds of battle were fading as station security regained control. Soon, rescue teams would arrive, and the galaxy would learn of what had happened here. They would hear the story of a human girl who saw past fear to find friendship, and of a Vorthik who chose love over violence. But for now, Emma and Kai sat together in the wreckage of the habitat, two members of different species who had found something more valuable than safety or survival. They had found family, and in doing so, they had changed the universe forever. As her mother's voice finally reached her through the comm system, Emma smiled and stroked Kai's fur. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all was the courage to see past fear to the truth that lay beneath, that every creature, no matter how different or dangerous, was capable of love. And sometimes that love was worth reaching for, even when everyone else was too afraid to try. Asterisk.